Workers all over the world will no doubt be marking this year's May Day or Workers' Day in a somber mood because of the ravages of COVID-19. In Nigeria, particularly where before the arrival of coronavirus, the Labour government landscape had been characterized by a number of issues. The commemoration will be even more somber given the gradual destruction of the economy by this pandemic and government struggle to ensure that workers are kept in employment even when it ends. For a close examination of these issues and others, we're now being joined from our Rise Abuja studio by Comrade Oshiomhole, National Chairman of the All Progressive Congress, former President of the Nigeria Labour Congress, and former Governor of Edo State in Nigeria. Comrade Oshiomhole, good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Comrade. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ruben. It's a great pleasure seeing you, and happy May Day.
Happy May Day, sir. Good to see you. Well, this morning I read your piece on May Day, which is your address as a former labor leader. Well, you're still a labor leader in a sense, to Nigerian workers. And you said that solidarity is the mood of the moment. For the benefit of our viewers, do you want to expatiate on this, elaborate on this a bit further? How solidarity is the mood of the moment, and whether indeed we're seeing that solidarity here in Nigeria.
Yeah, Ruben, thank you very much. You know, traditionally, workers talk about solidarity because as individuals, they are powerless, and they need solidarity, which is based on a certain principle that injury to one is injury to all. Because the worker as an individual is not capable to counter the enormous power of capital, or even in the public service, to counter the enormous powers of those who operate the apparatus of state, they need combination, they need solidarity amongst themselves to defend their individual and collective interests. So usually, we have workers sing solidarity song. That is the most popular labor song around the world. On the other hand, business executives, CEOs, presidents, ministers, and those who are powerful, whether economic power or political power, they don't need solidarity. They have individual strength to dominate, to exploit, to oppress, and to extract what they want. But we now see, in the new reality that we face, the world leaders are beginning to recognize that the principle of everybody to himself, God for all of us, can't work in the world that we are in. And that just like it was recognized in 1944, under the ILO Declaration of Philadelphia, as it said then, and it is valid today, poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. Now we know that public health challenge in any part of the world can become a challenge everywhere in the world. And so you are beginning to see not ordinary workers now, you are beginning to see people who thought they were powerful, whether they were president, they are prime ministers, they are CEOs of big multinational companies, they are now using the word solidarity. We are beginning to see Western governments calling for solidarity from Cuba. Now that for me is a fundamental thing for us to note that there are positive lessons to learn from this pandemic. That a world in which the powerful don't care about those who are powerless, that at the end of the day, nobody will be safe. So I am excited that solidarity, which is associated with the weak, who needs combination to build up strength, is now being used by people who otherwise were thought to be so powerful that they can do anything, just about anything they want, without reference to the other. We are beginning to see nation-state, advanced countries recognizing that they do not have the strength as a nation-state to fight this pandemic without collaboration, without solidarity with other countries. Not even countries that are richer. I mean, if it is about relative weight, Cuba has no business supporting a country in Europe that is a member of the European Union. So for me, I'm excited that whereas workers have always made the point that we need solidarity, we need to be to care for one another. Injury to one is injury to all. That now nation states, statesmen now recognize that problem in any one country can easily become problem in every country. And that's why I'm saying to the workers that their old proletariat language of solidarity is now being bought and has been bought and appropriated by statesmen and by business executives.
Thank you, Comrade. And certainly the notion of solidarity is more widespread now, and we can only hope that it becomes more widespread as time goes on. Now, yesterday, you also urged employers not to sack workers or cut salaries, and you said, in quotes, to deepen the humane content of industrial relations. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic is said to shrink the world economy by 20%. So, of course, it's going to have an effect on a lot of workers and a lot of businesses. But there's a role for governments and there's a role for business in cushioning the effects on workers. Can you help us to analyze those roles?
Thank you very much. The point I'm making is this. You know, the truth of the matter is Nigeria has opted for a market-driven economy. And business people simply look at wages and workers sometimes only as a cost element. They look at the salaries they pay in terms of cost. In the process, they forgot that the workers who receive their salaries as income. And it is the level of income that a worker earns that determines his purchasing power. And unless people procure goods and services, employers have nothing to sell. I mean, they have no one to buy. So for you to move away from the vicious cycle, which could be triggered, if it is not already triggered, by the current coronavirus, to a virtuous cycle, employers must look at other ways of cutting costs and see workers as their most important asset in the production process. In fact, the lesson that coronavirus has brought home to all of us is that the industries, the machines are still there where they are. They are not threatened. They are just locked in. All the facilities that are meant for production and services are there. I am here in Hilton Hotel. The hotel is beautiful, clean, ready to work, but there are no people. So the lesson to learn is that if you look for quick fix solution in terms of just cutting costs, reduce workers, stop paying salaries, you are going to deepen the recession, deepen the number of people in poverty. And when you have too many people in poverty, we now know that all the armed forces in the world cannot guarantee security if we just look at security in terms of military and police protection. That the real basis for sustainable security is that there must be justice. People must have a reason to look forward to tomorrow. There must be hope. So I expect employers this time to avoid what I call unilateralism, a situation in which the employer thinks that he has the prerogative to hire and fire without looking at social consequences. The logic that is being celebrated today, May-Day, is that the day unions were formed, when they became legal, when the status changed from being illegal combination at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to where they have now been recognized as social partners, is that every decision that the employers want to take, he should take it to the bargaining table, make his explanation to the social partners, particularly the trade union and the labor movement, and get the input of workers. And together, they can find solutions that will lead to a win-win approach, one that does not make one feel that he's just a tool to be hired when it's required and to be dispensed with the least of excuse. And of course, for government, the issues are even, for me, much more imperative. No government should sit down and make decisions that will affect working people without carrying the social partners along. And in the case of the state, the social partners goes beyond organized labor. We're also talking of the responsible segment of the civil society. Because being in government doesn't give you the monopoly of all the answers. I believe that we can get all the answers by engaging the various stakeholders in the system as to what do we do given this reality. There are hard choices to be made. There are difficult trade-offs to be looked at. There are hard policy choices that you have to settle for. And because government and governance is not value-free, it is an act of management of set of biases. That is what you call ideology. Who gets what and who pays? Now we face crisis. The issue is, are you going to evolve policies such that a person who is almost dying, you're going to draw blood from him to give to another one who is in emergency unit? You want to look at the guy who is relatively heavy and ask him for blood donation. This will require that nobody wear the cap of arrogance And people should recognize that the power that we wield, whether in government or in private business, is something that we are supposed to use for the good of humanity and for environment. We now know that no one is safe if many are unsafe. So for me, that is the lesson. I think that it is the way to go is to develop these institutions that are already there, activate them to work. There must be conversation, there must be dialogue, there must be collective bargaining. We must compare ideas, and nobody should claim monopoly of solutions.
Well, Comrade Oshiomhole, I would like us to dwell on this particular subject a bit more, because you devoted a number of paragraphs to it in your piece, where you were telling the private sector to operate with a sense of compassion and social justice, and to engage in what you described as stakeholder capitalism, which is another phrase, I guess, for corporate social responsibility. But right now, already in Nigeria, we have been getting reports that some big corporates are not paying salaries. They are even planning to retrench staff, to rationalize, and that the employment figure for Q2 in Nigeria is likely to shoot through the roof. Now, in some other countries, we've seen examples of government bailing out even big-ticket business operations. Here in Nigeria, an attempt has been made to address the interests of small and medium-scale enterprises. What else do you think government should do, maybe in terms of bailout for strategic sectors, in order to prevent job losses? And in the event that the employment figure goes up and these companies retrench and they reject stakeholder capitalism, then what should workers do? What will be their recourse?
Well, my central message to workers is that the fact of being organized and belonging to organized labor means that they are not exactly at the mercy of employers. They must be ready to organize, deepen their capacity for solidarity, reinforce the principle of injury to one is injury to all, and defend their collective interests. Because we are in a class society. Inequality is widening. It is not an act of God. It is a result of decades of our socioeconomic policy choices that government after government has pursued. Now, for me, the challenge of Nigeria is not so much about policy gap. We do have huge issues about accurate data. How do you ensure transparency? Now, if you look at central bank policies, you find, if you ask me, too many windows seeking to support small and medium-scale industries. There are huge numbers that have been doled out for agriculture. We have seen huge numbers doled out to discos to ensure that there is stable electricity supply. I am not sure how transparently those who benefit from these state funds have used them. When you use taxpayers' money to support private initiative, because don't forget, Ruben, that the logic of capitalism is that if you cannot compete, you perish. Now, if the state must take taxpayers' money to support corporate interests, then there must be a way that in return, they provide verifiable guarantees, not only to keep their workers, that when things go well, whatever they have been given, they refund back, because the state can't fund private enterprise. But I agree entirely with the logic that given the situation we are in, there are a couple of interventions that the state will need. In fact, I have argued in some fora where people lecture us about the weaknesses of the state, why government is so inefficient, the need to privatize everything and all of that. I always say, if there is any war that need the state, it includes business. Because as we see, when crises such as this come, just like it happened in 2008, it was statesmen, when Obama was in Washington, for example, it was statesmen like Obama, Merkel in Germany, and some other prime ministers around the world that were talking. We're not hearing the voice of IMF. We're not hearing the voice of the World Bank, because the condition was much more than them. It is statesmen that saved General Motors based on public policy. But they do have very transparent processes of monitoring who gets what and how do you pay back. That is why I said in the Nigeria setting, we need to get the serious segment of the civil society sitting with government, sitting with those who require bailout, ensuring that anything that is done with taxpayers' money is done transparently, and that those who benefit from the process are accountable for it, and that when they overcome the current stress, that they're able to pay back. Because for me, I do not subscribe to the logic of taking taxpayers' money to support people who are big. I mean, we have seen a situation where a company goes bankrupt, and AMCON takes public taxpayers' money to bail it out. It becomes a private debt, become a public burden, and the individual CEO responsible for the management or mismanagement of these enterprises are living as billionaires, and they are wealthy, and they move on to another business. Now, this raises issues of transparency and accountability. So in principle, I support whatever needs to be done should be done, because government ought to be the greatest assets of citizens, including corporate citizens. So, but the challenge in Nigeria is that we don't have reliable data. We know when money is offered to bail out those or to support those who need bailout. We hardly know whether they pay back. I also think, Ruben, that it cannot just be about what to give out. I think, for example, that our monetary policies are not too clear. I'm not a central banker. But I think that if we recognize that, for example, people who have borrowed money at ridiculous interest rate, now they are idle. They are not able to operationalize whatever money they have borrowed. I think that our interest rate ought to drop so that the cost of fund is less, and therefore the cost of servicing debts, even when your facilities are idle because of the coronavirus, will be less, so that you have less bankruptcy. In other part of the world, when they face crisis, I see interest rate dropping. In our own case, I see interest rate going up. I'm not able to understand why our own situation is so peculiar. So I think I want to see a kind of coherence between the monetary policies and the fiscal authorities working together, but also consulting, because like Abiola said, you can't shave people's head in their absence, however skilled you think you are. And I know that we have a very active civil society organization. Of course, there are some that are one-man institutions and so on, but there are also others who are clearly socially concerned and who are really troubled about the Nigeria condition and who can be consulted and be involved in some of these policy choices that we're about to make.
Comrade, thank you for your views in that regard. Now, I'd like to take you back a bit. You quoted earlier that poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. And one thing that we've definitely seen with the pandemic hitting Nigeria is the importance and also the fragility of our informal sector. Now, our informal sector in Nigeria really does account for a significant proportion of employment and our national GDP. I believe the IMF in 2017 said that the informal sector accounted for 65%. However, informal sector workers, as we know, are not protected socially, they're not protected legally, and they're also just not protected with any employment benefits. So how can we start to better protect the informal sector to maximize its potential, which has become more clear than ever in the light of COVID-19?
Yeah, this is, again, at the heart of the Nigeria problem, the absence of reliable and verifiable data. Everybody agreed that the informal sector plays a huge role and employs a huge number. But there are no reliable data about location. There are no reliable data about the nature of what they do. There are no reliable address that you fix. I mean, I saw a lady discussing the other day what to give support to certain persons. Who are they? Where are they located? I think this is where I think that we need a broader consultation. The absence of reliable economic data creates huge, huge challenges. And why do we refer to this sector as informal? They are categorized as informal, not because they are not seen. Everybody sees them, but there is very little documentation, very little paperwork, and therefore it is difficult to identify them in a transparent manner. And so you appropriate billions of naira to support small-scale businesses. You have huge challenges about definition of small. Where is he located? What exactly is he doing? How best can we assist it? But I'm not here to lament anything. I do not believe that the responsibility of leadership is to lament. It is to recognize the gap that exists between, in terms of where, what we ought to know and the so little that we know, even in a sector that accounts for so much in our lives. I mean, I worry, for example, and I think everybody has spoken about this, when these are the people who typically say if they don't work, they don't eat. And so they are so hard hit with this lockdown. The big businesses, they can talk about relative loss or drop in profit. But these guys, it's about survival or perish. So, but the challenge is how best do you identify them? I think the lesson to learn from now is that once we recognize as a sector plays such an important role, it cannot be beyond the capacity of the state to deliberately put in motion a machinery that is designed to document, have all the numbers you need, the location, the number of businesses, the kind of people that the businesses employ. For example, everybody talks about agriculture, and that is true. The Nigerian farmers basically subsidize the rest of us. If they insist on market price, in fact, if you look at their input relative to output, but they are not economists, they are not documented. I'm not talking of the mechanized big farmers now. I'm talking of the small-scale farmers. Now, they are the ones who live in the rural areas. Fortunately, this crisis, in my opinion, does not affect people like that because social distancing is a given in a typical small-scale farmland. Even in the mechanized sector, a guy is on the tractor to cultivate and all that. So the agricultural sector is a bit easy. They can't be so affected in terms of going to the farm, or that the expert is that government-made fertilizers are valuable, or that there's good rainfall timelessly and good weather, and prayerfully that they have a good harvest. But my point is, yes, people need support. My problem is the accountability factor. Who gets what? I mean, we've seen people queuing up for the purpose of a policy to quickly go and benefit. And then they come back. I've had CBNs go to give X billions to support small-scale businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will go to my village, and I will go to your village, and I will see small-scale business people. And I'm like, are you getting this facility that the bank has put there for you? And oftentimes, the answer is not exactly as it should be. So there are, we have the will to make the right decision, but there are issues about, the change, the implementation process, which raises issues of accountability and transparency. Those, if they are not dealt with, you continue to have a gap between what we want to do, what we are pronounced we are doing, and you see how many people say, but we are not feeling it.
Well, Comrade Oshiomhole, we're still on the conversation. It's going to continue, but we'll just take a short break. When we return, we'll have other questions for you. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show. Still with us in Abuja studio is Comrade Oshiomhole, National Chairman of Nigeria's ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, former President of the Nigeria Labour Congress, and former Governor of Edo State. Comrade, thank you for staying with us. Now, you are an emeritus governor. You were governor of Edo State for 2 terms. At the moment, in the face of the challenge of COVID-19, virtually all the governors in the 36 states of Nigeria and the minister of the FCT are facing very peculiar challenges. One is managing COVID-19 and containing the spread and treating people who are, affected in their states. The second thing is the challenge in terms of revenue that they now face. With oil prices tumbling and with COVID-19, even the entire country itself is facing the revenue squeeze. And we're told that state governments may not be able to get as much money as expected from federal allocation, maybe from May. And by June, that what is available to share may be even less than 400 billion. Now, if you were still governor, say in Edo State, how will you manage this situation? What will you do differently? And if you don't want that hypothesis, then what will you advise these state governors to do? How can they be more creative or self-reliant?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Incidentally, Ruben, if you look at my record, I assumed office precisely on the 12th of November, 2008. And around that time, the price of oil crashed to $30 at about this time. So it is not the first time that oil prices have dropped and therefore revenues accrued to states have also lessened. I remember during General Abubakar, the price even dropped to $9. So everybody knows, government, private sector players, every Nigeria, we know that oil prices are not stable. So long-term sustainable development plans cannot be based on a particular item that historically has never been stable. And so the price that we currently see is not for the first time. Now, what I did when I became governor and I was sworn in the midst of this kind of crisis is to call my commissioners and say, wait a minute, I am not going to be able to tell the Edo electorate that because the price of oil has fallen, I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, Z. Because somehow, during the campaign, I did not tie my commitment subject to oil prices. And so my task is not to lament that price of oil has dropped radically. My task is, in the light of this situation, what do I do differently? It was clear to me that there are a couple of things I could do differently. One of them include aggressive collection of taxes from all those who ought to pay taxes, and also broadening the basket, identifying that there are people with property, and that property tax has never really been pursued, aggressively in Nigeria. There are several other taxable items. Governments are run on taxes, not on money from liquid gold or solid gold. In some other jurisdiction, government does not pocket the money that comes from oil. They are owned by individuals. But government collect the taxes. So that is on the one side. Looking at other ways and means of making up for the shortfall in the revenue that is accrued from Abuja. And I was able to raise our monthly, what we call internally generated revenue, from about 275 million naira a month, and at the point we got up to 2.1 billion, such that even without allocation from Abuja, I was able to pay salaries. And if anything comes from Abuja, we devote it to capital projects. The second thing I did is that there's a lot of wastage in government in the area of overhead. When people hear of recurrent expenditure, they think it is synonymous with salaries. It is not. You will find that every other week, there is one national conference on tourism, there's national conference on education, there's national conference on God knows what, on information, and so forth and so on. And to be honest, Ruben, there is nothing that you can generate now in terms of ideas that are not already there. Hundreds of thousands of communiques have been issued that deal with various aspects of the Nigeria condition. So what we need is to sit back and see what we can cut. Reduce traveling, reduce other wastages in the system, re-examine your budget, because sometimes government budgetary system, I discovered, is that there are subheads that every year they just put something on top. For example, you want to buy camera, and you provide 2 million naira for cameras. The next year, they said, okay, last year, how much did we put for camera? 200 million. Now this year, put 10% more, 220,000 for cameras. Then you ask your question, what is the lifespan of a camera? Is it 1 year? Of course it is not. So I am sure that this situation will force every governor and every government, both local government, state government, and federal government, to re-examine the budget and look at possible items that can be isolated, deleted, that it will not affect the efficiency of government. We just need to look at what we can cut. And let me be very clear, Ruben. Cutting is not salaries. Because salaries, as I emphasize, determine the overall purchasing power. As we know from many people have rightly described the current pandemic as the Third World War, But this Third World War is much more serious than the Second World War. And the consequences that will arise from the devastation is such that we need to think carefully on solutions. That's why Keynes came up with a theory that the classical school, which seeks to, market-driven cost, income, etc., that it will bail people out. That it makes sense in conditions like this to get laborers to dig in the morning, pay them for digging, and in the evening, let them close the following day, let them close the manhole they have dug and pay them so that they will have money in their hand, which to procure goods and services. So that in return, those who produce these goods and services will have strong demand for those services. And in responding to those demands, they will employ more hands. And that way you can break away from vicious to virtuous cycle. I know that the temptation always is, let's stop paying. If you stop paying, what is government for? The primary purpose of government is the welfare of the citizens. And if you hire people, I mean, Ruben, it's not because I was a labor man. I do not pay my worker 30,000 naira. Because in truth, I know that he cannot survive on 1,000 naira a day. He cannot. If he has to pay his rent, if he has to wear something to work, if he has to take transport to work. And so if you further cut that, or even worse, refuse to pay it, you are going to have more and more people, not just poor, but so angry with society that they will resort to tactics that might further compound our security challenges. So I sympathize with the situations that governors are in. There are no quick fix solutions. But my advice is, engage the social partners. No unilateral decisions on matters that affect other persons. My salary is my right. It's not a privilege. If I'm in your employment, you are bound to pay me, particularly as nobody is arguing. I mean, what does it cost today to survive? I know that the cost of living varies from state to state. But on average, nobody can argue that the official pay on the table of our public service or of Nigerian workers is on the high side. Maybe those in the oil sector, those in the banking sector, at least some of the banks. There are a few sectors like that we can say that they have what you call a competitive pay, a living wage. For much of the private sector, I mean, when a professor takes home after tax about 400,000 naira a month, to be honest, this is not something you want to joke with. That is not something that will make him comfortable enough to go and stay in his research, in his study, and devote all his time, researching to various, depending on his field of discipline. So for me, I need people to recognize that wages are not paid because employers are rich. Wages are paid because services are rendered, but also because you need to strengthen demand in the economy so that you avoid a situation where people are too poor to procure anything. Now, for example, in the various state capitals, who are the tenants? The tenants that are able to pay their rent are those in the formal sector, of which government is the single largest employer of labor. So if it defaults in payment or reduce what it's paying, it will affect the capacity of workers even to pay their rent. And when they can't pay their rent, those who have invested in real estate will run into trouble. Now, if workers can't go to the market to procure tomatoes, to procure vegetables, and some of the basic things they need, because to be honest, the only man who consumes made in Nigeria food are the ordinary people. Now, if you depress their purchasing power, then this will affect the commercial life of the city. That market woman and that market man who sell gari, who sell dodo, who sell all of the basic things that the very ordinary people need, will find that there is no demand at all in the market. And so you can imagine when you further destroy the commercial life of a city. So for me, all I say is there can be no one policy or one drug that will cure all the ailments. Each state should look at its own peculiar situation and involve the trade unions, involve the other stakeholders, and together reason through viable and sustainable options that we need to pursue while we prayerfully work towards getting out of this crisis that we face. But Rube, we must make the point. This is not the last time the price of oil will crash. And in fact, the evidence is there that even without coronavirus, oil prices are unlikely to ever remain stable. They have never been stable historically. And therefore, it is not right for anybody to say, I did not expect the price of oil will fall. Because nobody has reason to think that the price of oil will remain high. Not when more countries are producing oil, not when we see the competition between Russia and America, and the intervention with modern technology, we are beginning to see that you can produce oil from other sources other than the conventional one. So I think that this occasion, as you say, necessity is the mother of invention. Now we must put on our thinking cap. I repeat, nobody should claim monopoly of solution, but we can generate solutions by engaging everyone in the system. Workers are not just tools, they have brains. Sometimes they have ideas that are richer. I mean, you have just reminded in your introducing me that I was president of NLC, but I was also a factory worker. I was a daily paid worker. I was general secretary of Textile Workers Union before I became NLC. And then I went to government. Now, what makes me, it is not when I became a governor that I got to know about certain things. So those workers you see, they are not just workers. They have brains. They are capable of clear thinking, and they are capable of suggesting viable options. And that is why in the letter I wrote to Nigerian workers today, I said it is time for labor leaders not just to say, you know, we don't accept this. This is not good enough. It is easy to see what is not good enough. But it cannot also be beyond their competence to suggest viable alternatives. And once the state and employer, whether public or private, are willing to sit down, manage what I might call superiority complex, recognize that we are all Nigerians, nobody should be more patriotic than the other. I don't have to be a governor to be patriotic. I was always a patriot. Even when I organized those strikes, they were meant to correct what I consider to be, you know, damaging policy options that the federal government opt for at one time or the other. It doesn't make me less patriotic. So once we recognize this and we carry everybody together, we put our papers on the table. Workers are able to see through the challenges that government face. They are also able to identify gaps in terms of revenue collection. And of course, we deal more decisively with the issue of corruption so that we minimize diversion. Because sometimes, talking on the other hand of it, people are willing to pay taxes, but each time they feel that the money they pay is diverted, the will to pay is weakened. And of course, if we have to rely on just law enforcement and you have a citizenry that is resisting the idea of paying taxes because they are deeply suspicious about what you might do with the proceeds of tax, then, of course, the problem becomes much more challenging. But, Ruben, I am convinced that in moments like this, there are moments of reflection. What I've been doing, you know, I have to be locked down and so on, is that I don't lock down my brain. This is the time to open up the brain and begin to think through. Now we are in this crisis. Well, the country is not producing, and we are consuming. How far can we go? So there are hard choices to be made. There are hard trade-offs to be made. But for me, conversation is the way to go.
Well, quite true.
You know,
on that
inclusion.
note, Comrade Oshiomhole, we will need to take a short commercial break. And when we return, the conversation will continue. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still having a conversation with Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, the National Chairman of the All Progressives Congress and a former president of the Nigeria Labour Congress. He is also the former governor of Edo State. Thank you for staying on the program with us, Comrade. Before we went on a break, you had made a number of very valid points. You spoke about the fact that there is nothing that you can generate in terms of ideas that isn't already there. You spoke about the fact that there is no quick fix solution. You spoke about the fact that wages are paid because services are rendered, not because employers are rich. And these are all very valid points that have been made and should be made on Workers' Day. Now, I'd like to address the easing of the lockdown, or the gradual easing of the lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and the FCT with you as we go on through the course of this conversation. Now, as we already know, we've been on lockdown for the past 4 weeks in these 3 states. But some analysts are now warning that seeing the rise in cases that we are seeing this week, maybe the lockdown may have come in too soon. But of course, we also know that several of us called for the easing of this lockdown because of the economic pains and the hunger virus that was attached to it. What are your thoughts, and how do you see or foresee this easing or gradual easing of the lockdown?
Well, to be honest, I am in a difficult situation. I am chairman of a governing party, but I'm also a Nigerian. And as I said, what I've been doing is thinking and reflecting. I think that when we unlock or when we relax, should be formed not by political considerations. It should be formed by scientific findings. This is the time we should listen to the expert who knows about public health and who are at home and who have the facts and who are knowledgeable in terms of the way in which this pandemic spread. If in their judgment they think we should relax, then we should. If they think we shouldn't, we shouldn't. Personally, I worry. You know, I mix with everybody, vertically and horizontally. And people tell me, you know, if people don't work, how are they going to survive? But I also ask, if they are sick and they are dying, how are they going to survive? It is not a choice between, close down, go and work, make some money and survive, and nothing else. There are hard trade-offs. If you expose more people and you have more spread, and we have the kind of situation that we saw in Italy, that we saw in Spain and some other places. I listened to the preamble by Dr. Ruben when he talks about the number of hospital places available, how people should be treated at home, and so on and so forth. For me, the evidence shows that rather than flattening the curve is rising sharply. I want to believe that at the end of the week, that there will be a reflection about the possible consequences if we unlock completely. I have seen a governor saying that there should be no lockdown at all, because according to him, in his own state, there is no incident of the virus. My fear is that I do not know that there is a snake in my house does not necessarily mean that there is actually no snake. Maybe I am not able to search all the corners enough. I do not believe, for example, that there is any state in Nigeria where there is no coronavirus. But I believe that because of the level of illiteracy, because of our attitude to the way in which we collect information, this is a country where people are born, they are not registered, people die, they are buried without autopsy, without any formality, except the celebrations, etc., etc. I think that it is difficult for one to pronounce with a level of confidence that there's anybody who don't have it. I will expect, if you ask me that, at the end of the week, there is need for serious reflection. We have to make hard choices between loosening the lockdown, free people to work. There are kind of jobs that you can do, that you can say, once you put on your face mask, that you are protected. But we have also heard from experts that face mask does not stop you from contacting the virus. It may at best stop you from passing it to another person. And now, given the quality and different type of face mask that have been produced, I am not sure how helpful those can protect people. Now, if there is a challenge between security of life and economic prosperity or well-being, I would think that we must resolve it in favor of first, security of life, and then sustainability of our economic lives. That is why on this issue, I really don't want to talk as if I know more than anyone, because the truth is I don't. But what I do know is we should listen more to those who know. We should listen more to those who are experts in public health, in the way in which this virus spread and how it can be curtailed. This is the most difficult period for any government, whether federal or state. We have seen it around the world, and there's a heavy debate, even in America. Some governors say open, some say don't. Some businesses say we want to open. But my advice to workers, for example, I understand NSC also was worried about the lockdown, I said, and so on and so on. I said, but remember historically, if workers are wasted through ill-thought-out relaxation of this process, more workers contract the disease and they die. Employers, there's surplus unemployment. Employers can go and employ other people. But those who are dead can never come back. So I am not able here, given the time we have, to say yes, no. I would say, let's look at what happened between now and the next few days, do deeper reflection, and see what we need to do differently. I also think that locking down some states and leaving others, as we have seen, we saw a problem in Kano that has now been locked down for another 2 weeks, 1 week longer than Lagos and so on. But the truth of the matter, as far as I'm concerned, is there are no rigid boundaries in Nigeria. You might know of the federal highways that connect one state to the other and block them. Nobody is able to block someone, because look at the maps, how the states, the boundaries between one state or the other. And I also don't think that the transmission is more through interstate. We have been told by the presidential task force that we are beginning to see spread within communities. So if the virus is already within a state, the fact that you have locked the borders doesn't stop it from spreading within those states. So social distancing, whatever you want to do, if the nature of the business is such that social distancing can be maintained, yes. But if the nature of the economic activity is such that social distancing is impossible, I will call for a rethinking. So I will want to see not a blanket open and close. I want to see a more creative thing that identifies the nature of the business, the one that can be unlocked, and the one that need to remain locked. Because at the end of the day, it's very clear to me that we have challenges, but obviously it is a lot easier for us as a nation to prevent the spread of this pandemic rather than to have additional hospital bed. But I think there was a mistake made in some of the communication. I watched somebody yesterday saying this virus, even without any care, any treatment, naturally it will go away. That is a dangerous statement to make. That is not supported by evidence. How come that about 60,000 people have died in America and the system didn't just kill them? Those people didn't manage to heal themselves. How come that we have the kind of deaths in Spain and in Italy with all the advancement in technology and healthcare infrastructure? I think that we need to manage our language very well. And the pressure must not be given by default that the problem is less. The evidence that we see from the numbers that are generated every day suggests that the curve is going up. In countries where they are relaxing because the curve has been flattened or is flattening. That is not what we are seeing. And it appears that because we have limited capacity for testing, until you test, you can't confirm. You cannot know more people who are affected than the number you are able to test. We have not tested 3% of Nigerians. Yeah.
Incidentally, you were referring to the Minister of Health, Osagi Hanire, when he was saying people should not be afraid, that 95% of the cases in Nigeria are mild cases and that people will fight it off anyway. But I would have loved to ask you a number of political questions. First, about the reconciliation process within your party at the national level, and also the status of your relationship with your successor in Edo State. But maybe we'll still have time for you to respond to that. But there is a question that came from our Twitter feed. A gentleman sent a question, and I'll just read it out. He says, being a former labor union leader whose achievements are yet to be surpassed by any other leader. What is Adams Oshiomole's take on the non-implementation of minimum wage in some APC states? What about pension to retirees and the insincerity of the government with labor unions after reaching agreements?
Well, thank you. This is a good question. Again, I try to answer this. When I was in government, the debate about the capacity of the public sector to pay minimum wage was raging. And I said, wages is not the cause of the Nigeria problem. And when I told the governors on the issue of wages, my position is clear. Even if I am Secretary General of the United Nations, the fact of my upbringing equipped me with the tools to understand the challenges in the environment that we are in. I said, wages is not the problem. I proceeded to increase the minimum wage in Edo State from 80,000 to 25,000 at a time when many governors were saying even the 80,000 was not realistic. I thought that an affirmative action was the best way to dismiss that argument. And happily, some people said, can you pay it? In the end, I paid it up to the time I left, and I'm very happy that my successor has continued to pay it. I think that non-payment of wages is the most unacceptable practice by any employer. It is just that, maybe the legal system, it takes time. These things are justiciable. It's about contract. Contracts are enforceable in court. An employer can be convicted for not meeting his contractual obligation. And, I ask myself, talking about as a former governor, I am not able to tell a contractor constructing 10 kilometers of road that because of X, Y, Z, the job he has done, I will not pay. Or even worse, that even in the face of rising costs of the critical inputs, such as cement, concrete, heavy-duty equipment, cost of services, etc., 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 I'm not able, I found for the 8-year period, that once some of the critical inputs in construction goes up...
Sorry to have to interrupt at this point. We do have to bring the conversation to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Morning Show and sharing your views, and happy Workers' Day once again.